Welcome to the Trinity Rep Radio Theater, an exploration of dramatic literature performed by actors from the Trinity Rep Theater Company. I'm Bob C., and my guest is Artistic Director Kurt Columbus. Kurt, formerly Associate Artistic Director of Steppenwolf Theater Company from 2000 to 2005, now here in Providence as Artistic Director of Trinity Rep. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you.
You're also a noted translator of the work of Anton Chekov, and that's what we're going to be hearing during our program today. Tell us what we're going to hear this hour.
Yes. Most Americans are familiar with Chekov as a playwright, and so we thought we'd bring some stories as a way for our audience to get an understanding of Chekov as a short story writer. We're generally unaware of his work as a writer in other areas. Chekov wrote over 600 short stories during his career, which I find absolutely remarkable. And in 1886 and 87 alone, he wrote over 50 in each of those years. I mean, if you think about that output, it's sort of staggering. We thought we'd show that influence with some of the more interesting short stories that can be enlivened by having actors read them. The first one is called The Huntsman. The thing that is really remarkable about Chekov as a short story writer is that he has a tendency to be less of a landscape painter and more of a calligrapher, if you will. The stories are a collection of words that will evoke a scene rather than describe it fully. And so we wanted to pick something that really captured that as our first story. And so we picked The Huntsman.
The Huntsman by Anton Chekov will be performed by Janice Duclos and Fred Sullivan, Jr.
A sweltering and stifling day. Not a cloud in the sky. The sun-parched grass looks bleak, hopeless. Rain might come, but it will never be green again. The forest stands silent, unmoving, as if the treetops were looking off somewhere or waiting for something. A tall, narrow-shouldered man of about 40, in a red shirt, patched gentleman's pants, and big boots, ambles lazily along the edge of the clearing. He walks down the road.
To my right are green trees. To my left, all the way to the horizon, stretches a golden sea of ripe rye. The sun makes me sweat.
A white cap with a straight visor, the gift of a generous squire, sits on his handsome blond head. He has a game bag with a crumpled black grouse in it. The man is carrying a cocked double-barrel shotgun and squinting his eyes at his old skinny dog who runs ahead, sniffing around in the bushes.
It's quiet. Not a sound. Anything living is hiding from the heat.
Mr. Yegor! He starts and turns with a scowl.
Next to me, as if she sprung up from the ground, stands a pale woman of about 30 with a sickle in her hand. She smiles. Oh, it's you, Pelagaya. I stop and uncock the gun. Huh. How did you end up here?
The women from our village are out here working, and I'm with them. Hired hands, Mr. Yegor.
Okay. There's a moment's pause. I start on my way.
I follow him. We go about 20 steps in silence. I haven't seen you for a long time, Mr. Yegor. You stopped by our place for a drink of water on Easter, and we haven't seen you since. You stopped for a minute on Easter, and then, God knows how, drunk, you swore at me, beat me, and left. I've been waiting and waiting. I've worn myself out waiting for you. Oh, Mr. Yegor, if only you'd come just one time.
What would I do at your place?
There's nothing to do there, sure, just... Anyway, there's the housekeeping. Things need looking after. You're the master. Look at you. You shot a grouse, Mr. Yegor. Why don't you sit down and rest a minute?
She laughs like a fool and looks up at me. Her look breathes happiness. Sit down? Well, why not? Why are you standing there? Sit down.
I sit down a bit further away from him in a patch of sun and, ashamed of my joy, cover my mouth with my hand. 2 minutes pass in silence. If only you'd come just one time.
What for? There's no reason. Stop by for an hour or two, mess around, get you all worked up. I can't stand living full-time in that village. You know I'm spoiled. I want there to be a bed and tea and polite conversation. I want to have nice things. And in the village, there you've got poverty, soot. I couldn't live there a day. Suppose they issued a decree that I absolutely had to live with you. I'd either burn down your hut or kill myself. From early on, I've been this spoiled. It's no use.
Where do you live now?
At the squire's, Mr. Dimitri's, as a hunter. I furnish game for his table, but it's more like he keeps me because he likes me.
It's not dignified, Mr. Yegor. For the masters, it's just a sport, but for you, it's like your trade, your real occupation.
You don't understand, stupid. In all your born days, you've never understood, and you never will understand what kind of a man I am. To you, I'm crazy, I'm lost. But for somebody who understands, I'm the best shot in the whole district. The gentlemen feel it, and even printed something about me in a magazine. Nobody can match me in the line of hunting. And if I hate your village life, it's not just because I'm spoiled or proud. From the day I was born, I've never known anything but guns and dogs. Take away my gun, I'll find a fishing pole. Take away the fishing pole, I'll hunt bare-handed. And I also did some horse trading, roamed around the fairs whenever I had money. And you know yourself, if any peasant gets in with hunters or horse traders, it's goodbye to the plow. Once a free spirit gets into a man, there's no getting it out of him. It's like when a squire goes to the actors, or into some other kind of artistry. Then, for him, there's no being a clerk or a farmer. Oh, you're a woman. You don't understand.
I understand, Mr. Yegor.
Meaning you don't understand, since you're going to cry.
I'm not crying. It's a sin, Mr. Yegor. You could spend at least one day with me. It's 12 years since I married you, and never once was there any love between us. I'm not crying.
Love? There can't be any love. It's in name only that we're man and wife. To you, I'm a wild man. And to me, you're simple-minded. Are we a couple? I'm free, spoiled, loose, and you're a barefoot farm worker. You live in dirt. You never straighten your back. I think like this about myself, that I'm first in the line of hunting, but you look at me with pity. What kind of couple are we?
But we were married in a church, Mr. Yegor.
Not freely. Did you forget? You could thank Count Sergei and yourself. The Count was jealous that I was a better shot than he was, kept me drunk for a whole month. And a drunk man can not only be married off, but can even be seduced into a different faith. In revenge, he up and married me to you, a huntsman to a cowgirl. You could see I was drunk. Why did you marry me? You're not a slave. You could have told him no. Of course, a cowgirl's lucky to marry a huntsman, but we need to be reasonable. Well, so now you suffer and cry. It's a joke for the Count, but you cry. Beat your head on the wall. There's a silence. 3 wild ducks fly over the clearing. I follow them with my eyes until they turn into 3 barely visible specks and go down far beyond the forest. How do you live, Pelagaya?
I go out to work now, and in the winter I take a baby from the orphanage and nurse him with a bottle. They give me 1.5 rubles a month.
So, another silence. From the harvested rose comes a soft song, which breaks off at the very beginning. It's too hot for singing.
They say you put up a new cottage for Akulina. It means she's after your heart.
Well, that's just how it is. You don't have a choice in the matter. Anyhow, goodbye. We've talked too much. I've got to make it to Baltovo. I get up, shoulder my gun.
When will you come to the village?
No point. I'll never come sober, and when I'm drunk, there's not much profit in it for you. I get angry when I'm drunk. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Mr. Yegor. He puts his cap on the back of his head and, clucking for the dog, goes on his way. I stay where I am and look at his back. I see his shoulder blades moving, his handsome head, his lazy, careless stride. I feel as if my gaze moves over the tall, skinny figure of my husband and caresses it. He seems to feel this, stops and looks back. He is silent, but I can see from his face, from his raised shoulders, that he wants to say something to me. I go up to him.
For you.
He hands me a 1 ruble and quickly walks off. I mechanically accept it. He walks down the long road, straight as a stretched-out belt. I catch his every step with my eyes. But now the red color of his shirt merges with the dark color of his trousers. His legs can no longer be seen. The dog is indistinguishable from his boots. Only his visored white cap can still be seen. But then, suddenly he turns sharply to the right into the clearing, and the cap disappears into the green. "Goodbye, Mr. Yegor," I whisper, and stand on tiptoe so as at least to see the white cap one more time.
We've just heard The Huntsman by Anton Chekov, performed by Janice Duclos and Fred Sullivan, Jr. Kurt, tell us about this story, why you chose this, and what attracts you to this story.
Yeah, I picked this particular story because it felt for me as if it would be enlivened by actors and the actorly performance. We tend to think of Chekov as a writer of his moment and someone who's caught in that mid to late 19th century moment, and that's not true. I mean, these stories have a kind of contemporary appeal that you find when you hear them performed out loud. I like to use this illustration. Chekov is not a landscape painter so much as he's a calligrapher. A landscape painter paints the exact thing, whereas Chekov draws certain elements. You know, the sound of the singing in the rows of that have been cut down, the three specks of the birds in the distance, the heat, these two people together, and so that calligraphy is filled in and enlivened by actors.
I'd like to ask you, Janice, what is it like for you to read a story like this?
Well, I'm so struck by Chekov's sense of humor. I mean, you read this story, and it's really a very sad tale about a woman who's been separated for her husband. She barely gets to see him for 12 years. And just reading it, what you play is the woman's need and her despair. But what it ends up as at the end is it's actually pretty funny.
So you've got the two sensations, the sort of tragic and the comic together.
Yes, and I love that he's able to do that so deftly.
And Fred, what is it like for you?
This very much the same. When I was explaining this story to someone, they were so shocked that these two characters were married that their immediate response was to howl with laughter. And I said, that's what people don't really understand about Chekov.
Right.
I said, and in our production of The Cherry Orchard right now, it really is surprising that just about moment to moment, the audience is responding with great glee and lots of laughs about how complex the characters are and recognizable.
And what is it like for you to act 19th century characters, and this is actually early 20th century, but 100 years later? How do you bring them to this period?
Chekov himself in a lot of his works talks about the people 100 years from now will look back at us and hate us for how small-minded we are and how flawed we are. And what's amazing is that we're pretty flawed right now, and so I don't really think of it as being in a time capsule and being shot backwards, but actually playing, as we'll talk about later, but in the moment. And the moments are very much the same because we're human beings, and really life has not changed that much.
Bob, there's a quote from Vladimir Mayakovsky, who's this Russian futurist from the turn of the last century. And Russian futurism is, of course, basically the performance art of its day. Everything changes except the avant-garde. And the Mayakovsky has this amazing thing that he wrote about Chekov on the 10th anniversary of his death. If I can read that right now.
Certainly.
Here's the quote. Chekov's language is as precise as hello and as simple as give me a cup of tea. In his method of expressing the idea of a compact little story, the urgent cry of the future is felt, economy. It is these new forms of expression, this true approach to art's real tasks, that give us the right to speak of Chekov as a master of verbal art. Behind the familiar Chekovian image created by the Philistines, that of a complainer, displeased with everything, the defender of ridiculous people against society, behind Chekov the twilight bard, we discern the outlines of the other Chekov, the joyous and powerful master of the art of literature. And that's a great quote. It sort of guides the selection of all of these stories, actually.
Thank you, Kurt Columbus, Artistic Director of Trinity Rep, and you're listening to the premiere program here on the Trinity Rep Radio Theater on WRNI. We're going to turn now to the second short story by Anton Chekov, and it's entitled The Woman Without Prejudice. Tell us about this.
Right. Again, the reason that we chose this short story is because it is the joyous and powerful aspect of Chekov's work. And again, I think I'll let the story speak for itself, and then we can talk about it afterwards.
Anton Chekov's The Woman Without Prejudice, and acting this story will be Phyllis Kay and Fred Sullivan, Jr.
Maxim Kuzmich is tall, broad-shouldered, and well-built. His physique can confidently be described as athletic. His strength is phenomenal. He can bend coins, pull up young trees by the roots, and lift weights with his teeth. And he swears that no man dares to wrestle him. He is brave and courageous. No one has ever seen him scared of anything. Other people, though, are quite scared of him, and if he gets angry, they go pale. His rich baritone voice is so powerful that it can deafen you. He is a rock of a man. I've never met anyone like him. But when Maxim Kuzmich, this giant of a man, declared his love for me, he was more like a squashed rat. He turned white, then he blushed, then he trembled. When he squeezed the words, "I love you," out of his mouth, his strength disappeared and his body became a big, hollow shell.
I declared my love for Yelena on a skating rink. She was skimming over the ice as light as a feather, while I chased after her,
stumbling, trembling, and speaking inaudibly.
I'm usually so quick, so nimble, but my feet kept getting tangled up when I'd trace some intricate pattern on the ice.
He looked miserable. I knew he was going to propose.
It's not that I thought she'd turn me down. My Yelena is pretty and dark, and I knew she loved me.
I was waiting for him to offer me his hand, his heart. I could scarcely contain myself. He was already 30, it's true, and he wasn't very successful or well off. But he was so handsome, funny, and graceful, a wonderful dancer, an excellent shot, and the best rider around. Once when we were out, he jumped a ditch that would have tested the best English steeplechase rider. Who wouldn't be in love with a man like that?
I knew that she loved me as much as I loved her. But there was one thing, just one thing that caused me misery, and it weighed on my brain. It made me angry one minute, made me cry the next. I couldn't eat or drink or sleep. Here I was, declaring my love for her. I was about to ask the question. And all the time, it was buzzing around in my brain and pounding at the inside of my temples. "Marry me, I'm so in love with you," is what I was saying to her, and at the same time I was thinking, I don't have any right to marry this wonderful girl. If she knew where I came from, if anyone told her about my past, she'd slap my face. My wicked, disgusting past. A rich, intelligent, high-class girl like this would wash her hands of me if she knew what I was.
Yes, I'll marry you. I am so happy.
I'm a cad. I should have told her. Confessed the secret of my past before I had professed my love to her. So what am I? I'm a cad.
My parents said yes immediately. They liked Maxim, and they could see that I was in seventh heaven. We wanted to get married right away. A winter wedding. I was so happy.
I was miserable. I should have confessed before I professed. I have to tell her before the wedding, but I couldn't. The thought of living without her terrified me more than the thought of telling the truth, and I knew she would.
The wedding was beautiful. Everyone drank and danced and said congratulations over and over. We laughed. It was beautiful.
I was laughing, but inside I was thinking, I've got to tell her. We may be married, but it's not too late. We can still part.
We were finally alone at the end of the evening, in our own room, and he looked terrible, pale, trembling, dazed, short of breath. He came up to me. He was so timid.
Before we belong to each other completely, there's something I have to tell you.
What's the matter, Max? You've been acting funny for days. Are you sick?
I have to tell you everything, my love. Sit down. I'm going to hurt you. Poison your happiness forever. But what can I do? I must tell you about my past.
Go on. Get a move on, and you can stop trembling like a leaf.
I was born in Tambov. My parents were terribly poor. I have to tell you who I am. Wait. I was a beggar. When I was a boy, I used to sell apples. Apples and pears.
You?
I know you're shocked. But there's more. Much worse. Oh, my God. You're going to damn me when I finally tell you. Please don't send me away.
What?
When I was 20, I was a clown. A circus clown.
A what?
A circus clown.
A clown? You were a clown? You were a clown, Maxie? You were? Oh, darling. Do a trick for me.
What?
Show me what you did, darling.
And so, I slowly stood up and walked across the room on my hands.
Bravo! Another. Do another.
All night long I did tricks for her. I stood on my head. I tumbled and I danced.
And in the morning, my father would tell this story for years to come. In the morning, my father heard a strange noise coming from upstairs and thought it was one of the servants moving furniture. When he came upstairs to investigate, he realized the noise was coming from our room and that the door was standing just open. He couldn't resist, and when he peeked in, he saw the most amazing thing. Maxim Kuzmich was doing a full backflip in the middle of the room, and I was standing next to him, applauding. And we were both blissfully happy.
That was The Woman Without Prejudice with Phyllis Kay and Fred Sullivan Jr. reading. What a great story that was.
Yes.
We talked before about Chekov's humor, which
Yes.
a lot of people don't appreciate, but certainly there is a great example.
Well, one of my favorite quotes is the following: medicine, this is Chekov talking about his work, right? Medicine is my lawful wife and literature my mistress. When I get tired of one, I spend the night with the other.
I love that.
Very naughty.
Naughty is right.
Let me ask you, Phyllis, because you have the lead in Cherry Orchard and you're reading this. What's it like to act a Chekov character?
Well, along the lines of what Fred was saying before, it feels to me, too, that we haven't changed very much. When you read these stories or you start to work on any of his plays, you realize that we really are all human beings with the same terrible impulses and the same glorious impulses and the same mundane things that bother us and exhilarate us and get us from one end of the day to the other, just as when Chekov wrote the plays.
Right, so 100 years later, we still recognize all of those things.
I think so. I mean, I certainly do. My way in to the play was to try to figure out what my understanding of this kind of person is. What are the things about Lovey that I can relate to that seem very familiar to me that I've experienced? And there's such a breadth of emotions that it really keeps everybody busy for weeks and weeks during rehearsal of this play trying to figure out.
Yeah.
And Fred, it sounds like in this story you're doing your best to get out of the situation.
I loved this story. I begged for us not to do this story because when Phyllis and I were asked one time when we were working on a play together what our philosophy of life was, I said, laugh, clown, laugh. It's later than you think. And it seems that Chekov thought that way too. The joy of my life is that I get to work on the greatest writers in history with a company of actors that I've worked with for 20 years. And so Phyllis and I in the Cherry Orchard have a goodbye scene. And not only do you see the two characters on stage saying goodbye to each other, but all the characters we've ever played. We've played husband and wife and Angels in America and girlfriend and boyfriend and the Beauty Queen of Lebanon and, a million Christmas carols and a million comedies and Falstaff and Mrs. Ford.
And all of that comes to you.
So our life, we just bring our shared experience and our love for working together to this incredibly beautiful, breathtaking, moving, and funny, charming scene that we are lucky enough to act.
It resonates in a particular way for the two of us, in a way that it might not resonate for two actors who just met each other 2 weeks ago and started rehearsal.
Well, after I heard that story, it brought to mind this quote that I read about Chekov. It says, when most people think of Chekov, they think of interminable silences and depressed characters who just as soon shoot themselves as face another day. A lot of people might have that idea about Chekov, but certainly this story proves otherwise.
Yeah.
Most, I think, Chekov productions are all in white and people moving slowly across the stage with a parasol saying, "Oh, today may never end." But when you...
For the audience.
For the audience. And when you come see Cherry Orchard at Trinity Rep, it's 2 hours traffic of the stage with 15 unforgettable characters. And yes, it's very moving, and I would say that that's part of life as well.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's a celebration of these people's lives and our own life.
These characters that Chekov creates are so well drawn.
Right.
They're just so distinctive and clear and interesting to
like
watch.
Dickens, or I had read last night that he wrote The Huntsman, the first story we read, in they said a steam room.
Right.
He wrote these very quickly.
Right. It's because he was balancing his wife and his mistress. I mean, it was balancing medicine and literature, and I do think that it's that combination of interest. Someone who is a student of humanity on every level, on a medical level, is also a student of the human soul.
And I think that's why we love him.
That's why we love him so much.
He's a humanist, first and foremost.
Now I'm upset about. I can't applaud anyone having a wife and a mistress, so I won't be brought into that controversy. But I tell you what I do love about Chekov is the fact that he seems to explore in a way that's a miracle to me the extremes of human behavior. And when we were working on the play, part of what was so thrilling was that in the course of a minute or two, someone would be at the absolute most despairing moment of their lives, and a few minutes later at the most exhilarated, joyful moment of their lives. And I would think, well, people don't act like this, but they do.
And he makes it work.
Constantly.
Yeah.
It happens throughout Shakespeare and Chekov. We know that is why Chekov and Shakespeare are the two favorite playwrights of most actors, because you get to do it all in a course of 90 seconds.
Right.
Let's move on to the next story here for our Trinity Rep Radio Theater, and we're going to be listening to a story entitled Drama, which makes it a little more confusing.
Which makes it a little more confusing, but also will make it even more confusing once we actually read it, because it's anything but a drama. But
A Drama by Anton Chekov, with Janice Duclos, Phyllis Kay, Fred Sullivan Jr., and Kurt Columbus.
If you please, sir, there's this lady wants to speak to you. She's been waiting a good hour.
To hell with her. Say I'm busy.
But she's been here 4 times already, sir. Says she simply must speak to you. She's almost in tears.
Oh, all right. Ask her to wait in the study.
Taking his time, Pavel Vasilyevich put on his frock coat, picked up a pen in one hand and a book in the other, in order to give him the appearance of being extremely busy, and walked into the study. There stood a woman, clearly a person of extreme respectability and more than respectably dressed, although she looked a little like a large French cake, wearing a 4-flounced bustle and a tall hat, surmounted by a ginger bird.
My dear sir, you won't remember me, of course. I had the pleasure of making your acquaintance at the Krutitskys. My name is Medusina.
Yes. Please have a seat. Now, how can I be of service to you?
Well, you see, I'm a great admirer of your talent and have always read your writing with such joy over the years. Please don't think I'm saying that to flatter you. Heaven forbid. I'm only giving credit where credit's due. It's just that I've read every word you've ever written. In fact, I myself am not a complete stranger to the pleasures of the pen. That is to say, naturally, I wouldn't dare call myself a writer, but nevertheless, I have added my own drop of honey to the comb. I've had 3 children's stories published at various times. You won't have read them, of course. And a number of translations, and my late brother worked on the magazine The Cause.
I see. And how can I be of service to you?
Well, you see, knowing your talent and your views, Pavel Vasilyevich, I would like to have your opinion, or should I say, to seek your advisement. I must tell you that I have recently, pardonnez pour l'expression, conceived and brought forth a drama. And before sending it to the censor, I should like to have your opinion.
Fluttering about like a trapped bird, Medusina began rummaging nervously in her skirts and pulled out a huge, fat notebook.
Now, Pavel Vasilyevich only liked his own writing, and whenever he had to read or listen to other people, he always felt as if the mouth of a cannon were being aimed straight at his head.
Good Lord! Look at the size of that notebook. Very well, madame. Leave it with me. I'll read it.
Pavel Vasilyevich, forgive me. I know how busy you are, how every minute is precious to you, and I know that in your heart of hearts you must be cursing me at this moment. But please let me read my drama to you personally right now. Please.
Oh, I would be delighted to hear it, my dear lady, but I'm extremely busy. I'm about to leave town, you know.
I'm asking for a sacrifice, I know. Call me brazen and importunate, but be magnanimous. I'm leaving for Kazan tomorrow, and that's why I'd like to hear your opinion today. Spare me your attention for half an hour. Just half an hour, I implore you.
Very well. I can spare a half an hour. Go on, I'm listening.
With a squeal of delight, Medusina took off her hat, settled herself more comfortably, and began to read.
First, she read how a maid and a footman, as they were tidying up a magnificent drawing-room, had a long conversation about their young mistress,
Miss Anna,
who had just built a school and a hospital for the village peasants.
When the footman exited, the maid delivered a lengthy monologue to the audience on the theme that
knowledge is light and ignorance darkness.
The footman returned and recited a long monologue about their master, the general, who could not abide his daughter's liberal convictions, and intended to marry her to a rich groom of the chamber, and believed that the salvation of the peasantry lay in keeping them in total ignorance.
After the servants had made their exit, the young lady herself entered and informed the audience that she had lain awake all night thinking of Valentine, the son of the impecunious schoolmaster who assisted his sick father, with no thought of reward. Valentine had studied all the sciences, but believed neither in love nor friendship, had no aim in life, and longed for death. And therefore Miss Anna, the young lady, had to save him.
Pavel Vasilyevich sat motionless, thinking.
Why pick on me? Why should I have to listen to your drivel? Is it my fault you've written this drama? Heavens, look how bloated that notebook is. This is torture.
Pavel Vasilyevich glanced at his wife's portrait, which hung between the windows, and remembered that she had instructed him to buy
4 yards of braid, a pound of cheese, and some toothpaste. Hope to God I haven't lost that sample of the braid. Where did I put it? In my blue jacket, I think. Oh, God. She's on scene 12. Soon it should be the end of Act 1. How could anyone be inspired in this heat, let alone a mountain of flesh like her? Instead of writing dramas, she'd be better off drinking iced soup and having a nap in the cellar.
You don't find this monologue a trifle long, Pavel Vasilyevich?
No, not in the least. It's charming, madame.
Thank you. I'll continue. Anna, analysis has eaten into your soul. You ceased too soon living by the heart and put all your faith in the intellect. Valentine, what do you mean by the heart? It's a concept in anatomy. As a conventional term to describe what are referred to as the feelings, I refuse to acknowledge it. Anna, in confusion. And love? Is that too only a product of the association of ideas? Tell me frankly, have you ever loved? Valentine, bitterly. Let us not open up old wounds, wounds yet barely healed. Pause. What are you thinking about? Anna, it seems to me that you are unhappy.
Scene 17. Good God! When the hell is this going to be over? If this torture goes on another 10 minutes, I'll have to call for help. This is too much.
But now, at last, the good lady began reading faster and more loudly, and raised her voice and announced,
Curtain!
Pavel Vasilyevich breathed a sigh of relief and was about to stand up when...
Act 2. The scene is the village street. Right, a school, left, a hospital. On the steps of the hospital sit the village lads and lasses.
Pardon me, but how many acts are there?
5. Valentine is looking out of a window in the school. Upstage, villagers can be seen taking their goods and driving their animals onto the village green.
Like a condemned man who knows he will not be pardoned, Pavel Vasilyevich gave up wondering about when the play would end and abandoned all hope. He was merely trying to keep his eyes from closing and that look of interest on his face.
The future seems so remote to me now, I cannot even contemplate it.
The village street becomes at once alive with activity.
Oh, look, some little birds landed on the windowsill. A sparrow.
Pavel Vasilyevich looked at Medusina. She was becoming blurred. She was starting to wobble. She grew 3 times larger, towered up, and touched the ceiling.
Valentine. No, you must allow me to go away. Anna, alarmed. But why? Valentine. Do not force me to explain my reasons. I would rather die than let you know those reasons. Anna, after a pause. You cannot leave now.
Medusina began to swell again. She expanded to gigantic proportions and merged with the gray atmosphere of the study.
All he saw now was her mouth, opening and closing. Then suddenly she became very small, like a bottle.
Valentine, holding Anna in his arms. You have resurrected me. You have shown me life's purpose. You have revived me as the spring rain revives the awakening earth. But it is too late. Ah, too late. An incurable malady gnaws at my breast.
Pavel Vasilyevich gave a start.
Scene 11. Enter the Baron and a police officer with witnesses. Valentine. Take me away, Anna. I am his. Take me too. Yes, take me too. I love him more than my own life. The Baron. Miss Anna, does your father's suffering mean nothing to you?
Pavel Vasilyevich stared at Medusina for a whole minute, as if in a complete stupor.
Looking round wildly, Pavel Vasilyevich stood up,
Gave a deep-seated, unnatural yell,
seized a heavy paperweight from the table,
and brought it down with all of his strength on Medusina's head.
Take me away. Take me away. I've killed her.
He was still screaming this when the servants came running in several minutes later.
After a brief trial, in which Medusina's script was offered as prime evidence,
I was acquitted.
We've just heard A Drama by Anton Chekov, read by Janice Duclos, Phyllis Kay, Fred Sullivan Jr., and Kurt Columbus. I have to say, Kurt, there was probably some experience that Chekov based that story on.
Well, you know, it's so funny because he clearly had this incredible sense of humor about himself. And you know, was a person that always took the view that nothing was too terrible, that you couldn't survive it. You know, we say this with the Cherry Orchard all the time. These characters think that the sale of the cherry orchard is the worst possible thing that could happen to them, and then it happens, and then they go on. You know, it's really about how we move on, how change moves us forward.
And I guess when you're a really great playwright like Chekov, you can really write bad drama. Make it work. What was it like for those of you reading this, Phyllis?
Well, we've all been in a room with someone who is fascinated by the subject of themselves to the point where you wanted to reach the nearest paperweight and bludgeon is perhaps excessive, but, you know, quiet them. So
I love the touch about noticing the little bird and then what happens visually to her as from his eyes. Right?
Yeah,
it's a great touch.
It is. It's a great story because it just has this kind of sweep that is unexpected. It takes place in one tiny little room, and yet it sort of goes all over the place.
and it's a very interesting look into the inner life of someone who is listening to someone who is boring them to death.
Yeah.
Yes, right. You're getting all that inner conversation while you're hearing the external. That's a beautiful quality of that story.
I love the part about just watching her mouth opening and closing.
Yeah.
I mean, who hasn't been there?
Yeah.
But he says it so well and does it so well. And we talk about, is Chekov relevant to our time? Well,
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think that bad productions of his plays and bad readings of his stories have a tendency to locate them in some sort of historical amber, you know, and that is the last thing that you want to do. There's a Russian director from the latter part of the 20th century that I'd like to read a quote from, if I may. his name is Georgy Tovstanogov, and he was a great director in the late 20th century. And he said, Chekov was ahead of his time, and productions of his plays must not look to the past, and perhaps not even to the theater of the present. Chekov is a man of the future, and it is there that he must be sought. Now, I don't think that quote suggests that we should be setting the play on Mars colony in 2038, but instead that the play always has a relevance to us, always needs to look not to the reproduction of historical detail, but to how it impacts us now, how it's real for us now.
And one of the great things that I love about working at Trinity is that a play that is 100 years old will be looked at as a new play. We try to pull it apart moment by moment and not fix it, not make up for its datedness or its problems and say, oh, we'll put it in clown suits and paint the set bright red, and therefore that will make it more accessible to you right now. Instead, we really go for the moment-to-moment and the life. And, of course, they're great writers because they knew what was there, and we're just kind of serving it and filling it. And I think that's why the audience is responding so well to this.
Besides the portrayal of the characters by the company, a wonderful company, I think what also makes this play so accessible for audiences today is Kurt's translation. It's a very modern translation. He's simplified some of the names. He's changed some of the words slightly so that they have more of a resonance with today's audience. For example, he takes the word serf and he changes it to slave, which is what they were essentially. And I also think that through the performances and the translation, audiences are understanding more about the comedy of Chekov. Chekov insisted that Cherry Orchard was a comedy, and Stanislavski, who most often directed his productions, insisted on directing it as a tragedy, and it drove Chekov mad. And I lead post-show discussions once in a while after Cherry Orchard. And there was a man there one night when we were discussing, was this a comedy? Was this a tragedy, in your opinion? And most people were saying it was a tragedy. And this man said, I'd like to speak to this. I'm a Russian. And the 2 world wars and communism nearly killed us. How is it a tragedy that this bunch of people has to find jobs?
People listening to these stories are going to say, wow, these are really funny. Is this Chekov?
Yeah. And it is. And when you encounter these short stories again, there are some wonderful collections that are out there with new translations. I mean, this is part of the problem. Look at Constance Garnett translated over 200 of Chekov's short stories. Now, that encyclopedic quality, you can't falter for that. That's a beautiful thing. But her tone tends to be a little bit more academic and a little less funny. And there's a wonderful husband and wife translating team, Richard Pever and Larisa Volkonsky, and they have these remarkable new translations of the short stories, and they've also translated Dostoevsky exquisitely. Their Anna Karenina, the Tolstoy, is also incredible, and they bring such a life and a newness to the work, and it's the work itself, but in a new way.
Let's turn to the last story now. During our first program here of the Trinity Rep Radio Theater, we're going to hear Anton Chekov's The Little Trick, and performing will be Phyllis Kay and Fred Sullivan Jr.
It is bright winter, noontime. There is a hard, crackling frost, and as Nadia clings to my arm, the curls on her temples are covered with silver rime.
We are standing on a high hill. A smooth rolling slope in which the sun is reflected as in a mirror stretches from our feet right down to the plain. There are little toboggans near us, covered with bright-colored cloth.
Let's go down, Nadia. Just once. I promise you, you'll be safe.
But I am afraid. All that space from my little feet to the end of the icy mountain seems terrible to me, an immeasurably deep abyss. My heart sinks and my breath comes in snatches when I look down.
Perhaps you should sit in the toboggan.
Suppose I should risk it. I will die. I will go out of my mind.
Please come. No need to be afraid. Don't be so timid, so cowardly.
I give in.
I see by her face that she is giving in at the peril of her life.
He sets me down pale and trembling on the toboggan.
I put one arm around her and hurl myself with her into the gulf. The toboggan flies like a bullet.
The cutting air hits us in the face. It roars. It whistles in our ears, tears at us, bites us painfully out of malice. It wants to tear our heads from our shoulders.
We can hardly breathe from the force of the wind. It seems as if the devil himself has caught us in his claws and is dragging us, howling down to hell. The surrounding scenery flows together into one long, swiftly rushing streak.
Only a moment more, and it seems we shall surely perish. And then, in a low voice, I hear,
I love you, Nadia.
The toboggan begins to run more and more slowly. By now the howl of the wind and the hiss of the snow beneath us are not so terrible. Our breath is no longer stopped, and at last we are down.
She is more dead than alive. She is pale. She is scarcely breathing. I help her to her feet.
I wouldn't go down again for anything. Not for anything in the world. I nearly died.
In a little while she comes to herself and begins to look questioningly into my eyes. Was it really I who had spoken those 4 words?
Or had I only seemed to hear them in the uproar of the wind?
I stand beside her, smoking and attentively studying my glove. Arm in arm we stroll about the hill a long while.
Were those words spoken or not? Yes or no? It's a question of pride, of honor, of happiness, the most important question in the world.
She is looking at me impatiently, dejectedly. Oh, what a play of expression on that darling face. What a play. How she is struggling. She has to say something.
I cannot find the words. Do you know what?
What?
Let's take one more ride.
We climb the ladder to the hill. And again I set her pale and trembling on the toboggan. Again we fly into the terrible abyss.
Again the wind roars and the snow hisses.
And again, at the fiercest and noisiest of moment flight,
I hear the low voice.
I love you, Nadia.
When we come to a stop, I stare at the mountain behind us and then scrutinize his face and listen to his casual and unimpassioned conversation. What happened? Who spoke those words? Did he? Was it a trick of my imagination?
She expresses the utmost bewilderment, returns no answers to my questions. Finally, don't you think we should go home?
Well, I like tobogganing. Can't we take one more ride?
She likes tobogganing. And yet, as I seat her again, she is as before, panting with fear and trembling.
We go down a 3rd time, and I look into his face, watch his lips.
Halfway down the hill I cover my mouth with a handkerchief, cough, and
I hear it again.
I love you, Nadia.
The riddle remains a riddle. I remain silent.
I take her home, and she slows her pace.
I wait to see if he will say those words to me.
She is suffering, I can see it. She struggles to hold the words back.
I cannot speak the words, only think them. The wind couldn't have said them. It's impossible. And I don't want the wind to have said them.
The next morning I receive a little note.
If you are going to the toboggan run today, please call for me.
And from that day I begin going down the slide with Nadia every day. And as we fly down on the toboggan, I utter the same words in a low voice. I love you, Nadia.
I become addicted to the phrase as though to wine or morphine. I cannot live without it. It is terrifying as ever flying down the hill, but now terror and danger lend a special fascination to the words of love, words which, as before, riddle and torment my heart.
The same two are always suspect, the wind and I. Of the 2 of us, who is declaring his love? She does not know. But now it seems to make no difference. As long as she can get drunk, it makes no difference which cup she drinks from. One noontime, I set out for the toboggan run alone. After mingling with the crowd, I see her looking for me.
Alone I mount the ladder, as though to my execution. I will ride alone. I will put it to the test. Will the words be there when he is not?
She is as white as the snow, trembling, but resolute. She takes her seat on the toboggan.
I say farewell to the earth forever, and start off.
Whether she hears the words or not, I do not know. I only see her get up from the toboggan, exhausted and weak. In her face, I can see that she herself does not know.
Alone on the slope, I had been too frightened to tell one sound from another, to understand anything.
But then comes the month of March. It is spring. Our icy hill grows dark and thaws. There is now no place for Nadia to hear those words, nor anyone to say them. No wind to be heard. I plan to leave for St. Petersburg. A day or two before I leave, I'm sitting in a little garden which is separated from the courtyard of Nadia's house by a high fence with nails. It is still cold, and traces of snow can still be seen under the dead trees, but the smell of spring is in the air. I see Nadia come out on her porch and cast a longing gaze into the sky.
The wind is blowing into my face. It reminds me of the wind that roared at us on the mountain when I heard those 4 words.
A tear rolls down her cheek.
I stretch out both hands, begging the wind to bring those words to me once more. And then suddenly, under the wind,
I say it. I love you, Nadia.
I cry out.
Smiles all over her face.
I reach into the wind.
Radiant.
Happy.
And so beautiful. And I go away to pack. Nadia is married now.
I am married to the secretary of the trusteeship department of nobility. I have 3 children. I never forgot the toboggan ride and the words in the wind.
I love you, Nadia.
It is the happiest, most touching and beautiful memory of my life.
But now, when I am older, I no longer understand why I said those words, nor why I played that little trick.
The Little Trick by Anton Chekov, read by Phyllis Kay and Fred Sullivan, Jr. What about that play? What's that, or that story? What does that mean to you?
Gigantic, sad, loving, wonderful, sentimental, complex heart beating in every second. And we live for it.
You don't feel the least bit sadistic.
Oh, maybe just a little, but certainly less than The Huntsman. And I do believe that there is a tremendous amount of love in all its complexities.
It's that thing that when we're young, you do sort of cruel things, and they aren't meant cruelly, but he's exploring how when we're young and in love, we play little tricks, and then later on you look back and think, why did I do that?
See, actually,
Because...
and this is the first time I've had this response to that story, but just now when we finished it, I thought that it's not a particularly cruel thing for him to do because it provided this extraordinary memory for this woman that becomes this defining moment in her life in a way, and she has that, and it's a happy memory. It's not, she doesn't look back on it and say that it made her unhappy. It's this beautiful memory.
Yeah. There's a great quote that see, I'm Mr. Quote today, but there's a Russian emigre poet from the 1920s and 30s named Boris Papalovsky, and so if you'll allow me to read this one, Dostoevsky cannot help us live. He can only help us when we quarrel, separate, die. Tolstoy could perhaps, but his eulogizing of bourgeois prosperity is positively revolting. Now Chekov. Yes, Chekov can help us live. Chekov teaches me to endure in my own special way, not to give up, to keep hoping. And I think that's, Phyllis, that's what you're talking about. It's the fact that it should, in another writer's hands, this would be cruelty. In Chekov's hands, it's this beautiful thing.
Well, it's this magical memory that cannot be explained. And I just think that's such a lovely element to the story, that she's got a special memory that she doesn't share with anyone, and because it's impossible to describe to anyone else, that adds to its unique element, I think.
And being the actor who played all the men today, I have to say, is he being cruel? It's called The Trick. I mean, is it mean, or is he a coward and didn't step up and speak for himself? And I think being able to say I love you in somebody's ear when they're not looking at you while you're riding a toboggan is very safe, and I think he feels love for her. And maybe I'm a softie. But
on whom was the trick played, really? Was it played on himself?
It seems like a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
The story is about the man not stepping up, it seems to me, and he lost her, but they have the memory of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's fascinating because it's kind of unexpected. You don't quite know where the story is going until the very end, and even then, it's a complex kind of feeling that you have.
All of them had a magnificent twist. When you talk about I have the secret in my past I can't tell you about the wedding night, I'm a clown. It seems like this joyful Twilight Zone, this crazy Rod Serling kind of wonderful.
So, summing up Anton Chekov, we've heard the humor of Chekov today. It's not, of course, all of Chekov, but it certainly might give our listeners an idea of the breadth and variety of this wonderful writer, so that indeed it's not a bunch of people, just as wishing they'd shoot themselves as face another day. This is important to hear, because I think a lot of people do have that perception of him, and he certainly sees life in a much broader, grander scale.
Yeah, if you don't mind, again, I'm just going to read one more quote, and this is from Chekov's letters as a way to wrap up. He was asked to write an autobiography for a class reunion because he went to the medical school of Moscow University, and he writes back to his classmate and says, I suffer from autobiographobia. It's a real torture for me to read any details about myself, to say nothing about seeing them in print. I'm enclosing several dates entirely unadorned on a separate sheet of paper. It's the best I can do. If you like, you can include that on my application for admission to the university I misspelled medicine. But then he goes on to include this little bit, which I think is really, it's a mini biography, and it helps. I, Anton Chekov, was born on January 17, 1860, in the small Crimean city of Taganrog on the Black Sea. I was educated first at the Greek school of the Church of the Emperor Constantine, and then at Taganrog High School. In 1879, I entered the medical school of Moscow University. I had a very dim idea of the university at the time, and I do not remember exactly what prompted me to choose medicine, but I've had no reason to regret that choice. During my first year at university, I began being published in weekly magazines and newspapers, and by the early 80s, these literary activities had taken on a permanent, professional character. In 1888, I was awarded the Pushkin Prize. In 1890, I traveled to the penal colony on the island of Sakhalin and wrote a book about the penal system there. Not counting trial reporting, reviews, miscellaneous articles, short news items, and the columns I wrote from day to day for the press, and which would be difficult to locate and collect, during the 20 years I've been active in literary circles, I have written and published more than 4,800 pages of novellas and stories. I've written some plays as well. And that, as a self-description, really gives me a sense for the man, and I hope gives our listeners that sense as well.
Well, I want to thank you all for being with us here on our premiere program of the Trinity Rep Radio Theater. It was wonderful. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
You can hear the Trinity Rep Radio Theater again by visiting our website, wrni.org. We'd appreciate your comments and suggestions for future broadcasts, and you can send your email comments to wrniprov.yahoo.com. Trinity Rep Radio Theater is produced by Trinity Repertory Theater in partnership with WRNI. Performers included today Janice Duclos, Phyllis Kay, Fred Sullivan Jr., and Kurt Columbus. Our producer is Kurt Columbus, the studio producer is Mark Degon, and the executive producer and general manager of WRNI is Joe O'Connor. I'm Bob C. with Trinity Rep Radio Theater, hoping you'll join us again.